Behavioral mechanics, the effects of serotonin, histamine, and dopamine interactions on human populations. In this presentation, I will provide a summary of the book and the surprising effects of serotonin and dopamine interactions on human populations, especially male populations in the United States. The book has four key chapters, each matching a hypothesis originally formulated in separate and unique academic papers written by the author between 2017 and 2024. First, let's focus on the neurotransmitter serotonin. The first chapter's hypothesis is seasonal pollen-driven changes in histamine produce serotonin spikes that push mentally ill male humans over the edge, causing mass shootings. In essence, the severity of the effects on organisms, especially human males, of histamine and serotonin biochemical interactions and their subsequent behaviors has been vastly underestimated in the scientific community. A key underlying theme in the book is that pollen-driven changes in human serum histamine, where pollen levels increase and thus histamine in the human body increases, cause a subsequent drop in serum serotonin. Modern research has confirmed this inverse relationship between histamine and serotonin. Thus, as pollen and histamine drop, serotonin will increase or even spike. People wonder why most mass shooters are male. The answer is almost certainly tied to research showing that human males have 52% more serotonin than females. Humans, like all life, are sensitive to their environment, and we also know that mentally ill or unstable individuals can be triggered into impulsive and violent activities from spikes in serum serotonin. Research data in the book shows an association between the dates of violent acts, especially male single-shooter mass shootings in the United States, and the dates of dramatic decreases in pollen levels, thus indicating pollen and serum histamine level drops as a possible precursor or triggering relationship. Data from public online web pages like pollen.com and weather.com of pollen levels in given cities or zip codes, when compared to the dates of gun violence or mass shootings, appears to show a clear association between the date of violent acts and the dates of dramatic decreases in environmental pollen allergen levels. This model can be useful, if not critical, for law enforcement, clinical psychologists, and public safety officials. Having a heightened level of risk and increased social monitoring during the times of the year in each city or region when allergen or pollen levels increase, and thus can have major drops or fluctuations, and especially during the months after the pollen season, as the allergens drop down to zero, can save lives. A sample of 55, 15 in fall months and 40 in spring months, high-profile mass shootings, each involving a single mass shooter, between fall 2017 and spring 2023, was curated and analyzed. The label high profile being defined as a mass shooting example that was a headline story on the CNN News Channel's webpage at CNN.com. The pollen.com app shows a graph of the annual pollen peaks of spring and fall by months of the year. The histogram on this slide shows a correlation where there are more mass shootings in spring months, and the most pollen months are also in the spring. A correlation is also seen where mass shootings occur just after the peak pollen months. In short, as pollen decreases and serum serotonin thus increases, especially after the two largest pollen events of spring juniper tree pollen, mid-February to mid-March, and fall ragweed pollen, August to September, as noted by the red arrows on the image. Note the lack of any mass shootings in September, December, and January. On this slide, each of the 15 fall mass shooting examples from our sample are shown as red dots on top of a diagram showing U.S. cities and their ragweed levels by month from north to south. Note how every mass shooting example occurs after the peak ragweed or completely after ragweed season ends for the season and occurs in a pattern that aligns with the dates of winter frost by latitude. Note too how the end of ragweed season by latitude occurs diagonally as winter frost cool temperatures begin in the north and slowly move to southern latitudes. The next few slides show how online data from websites like pollen.com reinforce the ideas in this book, where pollen drops cause serotonin spikes that cause human males to act impulsively. Here we see a mass shooting at an Ackworth or Atlanta, Georgia Asian spa on March 3, 2021. It coincides exactly with a large drop in environmental pollen as seen on pollen.com. Here we see a Boulder, Colorado King Store mass shooting on March 22, 2021. It occurs right after a dramatic pollen level decline. Here we see a mass shooting at a Boise, Idaho mall on October 25, 2021. It occurs exactly as the fall ragweed pollen level declines to zero. Finally, between November 13th and 23 of 2022, 4 mass shootings and a knife attack occur in the U.S. states of Virginia, Idaho, Colorado, and Maryland at the end of the fall ragweed pollen season in the very week that pollen levels, as seen on the pollen.com website, dropped to zero. The hypothesis of the second chapter is areas of dense histamine create larger changes in serotonin levels. In other words, a higher serotonin slope, and thus lead to individuals and communities with greater creativity and even increases in innovation and genius. In essence, histamine versus serotonin biochemistry can be considered as a creativity pump and an alternative explanation for the success of Western civilization. During spring, summer, and fall pollen seasons, but primarily in the larger spring and fall seasons, we can see from a generic graph of pollen level patterns where 4 points show where creativity will be the highest. On these days, ideas, seemingly out of nowhere, will pop into the heads of individuals as the up or down change in serotonin levels is very large. In other words, when there is a very high serotonin slope. Modern research has confirmed the association with serotonin to creativity. This idea is thus extended, starting with a map of ancient pollen locations, in yellow, from fossil records. The location of Western civilization-defined nations in Europe and in the United States, within the largest global pollen environments on the planet, is proposed as a key factor leading to their success. Environments with dense pollen concentrations will cause large up and down changes in serum histamine, directly causing reductions and increases in brain serotonin. In other words, a larger serotonin slope linked to higher levels of creativity. The pollen ecosystem in northern latitude is thus considered the hidden driver of the success of these northern populations, as the biochemical interaction between histamine and serotonin leads to a creativity pump that is proposed as the fundamental driver of intelligence in micro and macro human populations. Historians have attempted to identify the causes for the success of Western nations over other regions of the world, especially as it relates to the accumulation of technology and knowledge and their eventual power in the modern world. One could even speculate that the very act of domestication into living areas like caves, dwellings, etc., began the initial serotonin slope, leading to the origination of human intelligence. Here we see a map of ragweed distribution in Europe overlaid on a political map of Europe. The key intellectual capitals of Europe lie within the dense ragweed pollen zones. The combined images show a significant association with pollen density in these intellectual capitals, including Paris with Pablo Picasso, Vincent van Gogh, and Marie Curie, Vienna with Kurt Gödel, Ernest Mach, Ludwig Boltzmann, Sigmund Freud, Budapest with John von Neumann and so many other brilliant Hungarians, the German cities of Munich with Albert Einstein, Salzburg with Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Nuremberg with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, Milan in Italy with Leonardo da Vinci and many others, and Zurich, Switzerland with Carl Jung and many others. These cities have the largest serotonin slopes and thus produce individual and aggregate populations with higher levels of creativity and intellectual performance. Of note is the absence of Isaac Newton from our list of European genius-producing cities. How do we explain one of the greatest geniuses of all time with London not in the area of the model? But Isaac Newton does fit in the model. one must simply know the personal history of Newton. There is zero doubt about the scale and quality of his genius, but of interest for this model is where did he do the majority of great and original work? When the Black Death plague hit London, Newton isolated himself for years in the countryside at his Woolsthorpe Manor. It was here, amongst the pollen, that he made his major discoveries, as he unknowingly placed himself into a high serotonin slope environment versus especially mugwort pollen. Mugwort is the British weed in the same family as ragweed. As noted online, soon after Newton had obtained his BA degree in August 1665, the university temporarily closed as a precaution against the Great Plague. Although he had been undistinguished as a Cambridge student, Newton's private studies at his home in Woolsthorpe over the subsequent 2 years saw the development of his theories on calculus, optics, and the law of gravitation. The increase in intellectual creativity and innovation, and thus technology and power, of modern Western civilization nations and China and Japan moved at an exponentially higher rate of growth than the past growth of ancient civilizations. This book attempts to explain the cause of that rate of intellectual and technological advancement via this environmental and human biochemical mechanism. In summary, the biochemical interaction between histamine and serotonin leads to a creativity pump that is the fundamental driver of intelligence in human populations. One might speculate further, noting the interesting correlation between the location of the first works of human art, or drawings and jewelry, in the Blombos Cave in South Africa, and its location having a very high density of pollen per the fossil record data. Per the described model, it does not matter if ragweed and humans both prefer areas that are low, moist, and near bodies of water. The point is that it was as soon as humans migrated and settled in those pollen-dense regions that the brain spark from the serotonin slope leading to creativity begins. Note that fossil records show dense pollen in Africa, primarily in 2 areas, in the countries of South Africa and Tanzania. Thus, it should come as no surprise that in the Blombos Cave near Cape Town in South Africa, we see the very first cave drawings and jewelry. In essence, the beginnings of brains using analogy and creativity. To summarize, humans originate in Botswana and migrate to the low, wet, and water-plentiful areas in South Africa. They domesticate in the sense of sheltering from the environment, and they also change environments to one where their immune systems are not familiar to the allergens. They are traveling as adults with less adapting immune systems, and they encounter unfamiliar weeds with pollen. This caused the biochemical histamine reactions, and thus the discussed up and down changes in brain serum serotonin, and thus human creativity is born. Now let us also discuss the effects of the neurotransmitter dopamine. The hypothesis in the 3rd section of the book is cyclical intervals when serum serotonin is low and serum dopamine is high cause weeks each year of increased impulsive anger. This is found in data like days of the year most likely to have a battle start. The peak pollen months in spring of February, March, April, and May, and the fall months of August and September are proposed as having higher levels of impulsive anger from the histamine-driven lowered serotonin in humans, especially human males. Periods when serum serotonin is low and serum dopamine high cause weeks each year of increased impulsive anger. The starting dates of battles by month are counted and sorted from Wikipedia data listing the start dates of all major battles from the year 1901 to 2000. Note how the top 5 months exactly match the top 5 pollen-dense months. The correlation being that a certain degree of attack decisions or impulsive aggression is due to the influence of serotonin-lowering histamine from environmental pollen sources in those months. Now, few things, if any, are more complex than war. This hypothesis does not try to address the cause of something as complex as war with its assortment of social, economic, cultural, and political variables. The key to the hypothesis in this 3rd section is that the timing of human battles as a subset of warfare aligns with months of low serum serotonin and weeks of the year when humans have high dopamine. Research findings suggest that when serotonin levels are low, it may be more difficult for the prefrontal cortex to control emotional responses to anger. A simple analysis of the Wikipedia information shows that war battles are 41% more likely to start in 5 specific intervals than any other week in a year. Human males will basically be angry in these intervals as dopamine is high and serotonin, due to the higher pollen, is low. The anger box weeks include the second or third weeks of March, the last week in April or the first week in May, the third or fourth week in May, the second or third week in August, and the first or second week in September. It is during these 5-week-long intervals when humans act abnormally with impulsive anger and when battles and war are much more likely to begin. A useful bit of information for military leaders and planners. The author's own research has revealed a 40-day-long dopamine cycle in the human brain that affects behaviors. The extension of this theory has revealed a possible pattern in the stock market, using it as a proxy for aggregate human behaviors like impulsivity and confidence in the lack thereof. The fourth and final section's hypothesis is a 40-day-long dopamine cycle in the human brain is the cause of aggregate growth in the U.S. stock market, with the exact sell high and buy low dates identified in this research, thus providing basically a risk-free investment strategy with returns above the S&P 500 annual return. In fact, in the 5 years that this methodology has been used and monitored, every year showed positive gains, with the lowest having a 39% annual return and the highest a 49% return, always well above the S&P growth for the given year. The research indicated a dopamine cycle or clock in the human brain. The winter solstice on December 21 is considered as the start of the first cycle, and there are 9 40-day-long cycles in any given year. The cycle starts with a 10-day-long low dopamine phase with 5 days of increasing anxiety until a day 5 low point with depression. Next are 5 days of climbing dopamine levels, returning to the normal level. This is immediately followed with a 10-day-long high dopamine phase with 5 days of increasing dopamine, reaching a day 15 peak, before 5 days of diminishing dopamine, back to the normal dopamine level. That is then followed by a 20-day-long normal dopamine phase with calm and focus before the entire cycle repeats. An amazing observation of the study was that migraines were observed in multiple individuals always on the first day of the start of the low dopamine phase, as dopamine began to drop on day 1 of the 40-day-long cycle. That same day also saw a reliving of traumatic events that had occurred any time in the prior 35 days since the previous 5-day-long low dopamine interval of the prior cycle. The theory here is that the brain is offloading, similar to modern computer processing, critical learning from the prior 35 days into the brain's long-term memory, with painful, critical, or traumatic lessons learned that are thus stored first in the queue and processed on the first day of the 5-day-long low dopamine phase via the process of long-term memory storage. The most unexpected observation from the research was that the same first day of the 10-day-long low dopamine phase matched year-over-year low points of the stock market as tracked by daily closing values of the S&P 500, the low points within each 40-day range or cycle. The high point or sell point days in each of the 9 40-day-long cycles were also observed, all of them occurring 35 days after the low point or buy low days, and thus 5 days before the low point day of the next 40-day-long dopamine cycle, as dopamine again begins to drop. In this slide, those dates are overlaid on the calendar year to produce a schedule of buy low and sell high days. Here we see a screenshot of the Robinhood mobile app showing the values of the Spider S&P 500 ETF stock market indexed fund for a week in March 2022, where the March 4 sell high of cycle 2 and the March 10 buy low of cycle 3 are seen, along with a screenshot of a $500 purchase of the SPDR Spider shares on the buy low date. This slide presents example linear regressions of a buy low day, the market day on or closest to April 19th, and a sell high day, the market day on or closest to September 21. They are shown to illustrate the significance of the differences between the S&P 500 values in the buy low and sell high dates for the years from 2000 to 2021. Finally, during the leap year of 2024, the sell high spike events and the buy low drop events were seen to match the predicted shift that would occur, as the additional day of February 29 would lead to these event dates after February occurring one day earlier for the predicted 40-day long calendar pattern. The three examples are from screenshots of spider ETF graphs from a Robinhood smartphone app taken on March 12, April 19th, and May 29 of 2024. Let me close this presentation with some possible action items. Solutions to societal scourges like mass shootings and impulsive military battles could involve actions like the free distribution of antihistamines or SSRI medications to lower histamine and raise serotonin during peak pollen months, and sedatives or serotonin lowering meds immediately after pollen season to reduce serotonin that spikes or surges after pollen levels fade. AI and big data should also be deployed to examine possible patterns in dopamine levels in humans, which may correlate to buy or sell actions in the stock market or the start of military battles. This information would thus provide an operational advantage to law enforcement, military leaders, and public safety officials. Thank you for listening. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you read and enjoy the book too.